Hello, guys. We're going to be talking about the things that can affect scale weight on your carnivore diet. So, we're looking at a number of things here. Some will have overlap, some will not have any overlap. Some might be relevant to you, but not to me. The first one we're going to go over is the macronutrient composition of the diet. So, Jerome, how would scale weight be affected by that, do you think?
Sure. So people that are eating more carbohydrate in their diet, carbohydrate, I think one molecule of glucose will bind to three molecules of water to form one molecule of glycogen that gets stored in the muscles or the liver. So at least people that initially go onto low carb diets will notice that they dump a lot of water. And as there's some initial glycogen depletion, people experience a significant amount of scale weight loss, usually in the first week or two, before it kind of normalizes. Now that goes the other way too. If you eat generally fewer carbs and then you might have a cheat meal or a meal that has a lot of carbohydrates, you may notice, and I've seen this in myself, that it's very easy to feel dehydrated. You might notice that you have a big carb meal, maybe don't have a lot of fluids, and all of a sudden you feel really thirsty, maybe 30 or 60 minutes later, or your urine is a lot darker. Your body is taking the water that it has and combining it with the carbohydrates that you just ate, and a lot of it's going into your muscles and into your liver. So similarly to how you can lose a lot of water weight initially by reducing carbohydrates, you could also gain a significant amount of weight by consuming a large bolus of carbohydrates or having a weekend where you kind of go nuts on carbs. That's the first thing that comes to mind. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think a lot of this does come down to the amount of food we eat. The amount of food we eat, guys, you'll notice that this is going to be the biggest impactor on your body weight. A bar cutting off a limb, of course. So, I mean, other than that, I mean, the overall food mass is going to be the biggest thing, like I said. So, what we know is people that eat a lot of carbohydrates, more water, more inflammation, more weight, more thirst as well, more salt, more retention of just weight overall. Other things as well are the inflammatory responses. So, these can be from actually allergic reactions or intolerances as well. And that's just not just arthritis and autoimmune diseases. These sort of things can be from anything, even like the things where, for example, if you have an allergy to a certain compound or a chemical within, I don't know, hand wash, that might cause downstream some inflammatory response. You might then have less of your native bacteria on your hands, eat some food. Your body is out of whack, it's out of its natural microbiome setting. That's a very nuanced, kind of odd way of looking at it, but these things can make an impact, of course, as well. There's bacterial issues as well, so infections. If we're infected, we're usually more inflamed. Our guts have to deal with that. It's a stressful situation to be in, so we'll actually end up retaining more weight as a result of that. How does that work? It's just an inflammatory, chronic, well, acute response. So it will go away eventually. It's just there for now. There's not something to be too concerned about. One thing as well, which I know is very, very, very common, is when people weigh themselves, say, every day or every few days, first thing in the morning perhaps, have they been drinking a lot at night? Does that come into it at all? I mean, do you have any experience with that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I've seen in myself that depending on the time of day, depending on how much I have to drink at night, that my weight can fluctuate a significant amount on a daily basis. So I generally recommend that people try and weigh themselves at approximately the same time on the same couple of days of the week where their routine is a little bit more structured to try and be a little bit more consistent. But it's common for me, even on a somewhat regular basis, to have maybe 5 pounds swing, about a little over 2 kilograms swing in my scale weights on any given day, depending on a number of some of these factors. And if people put a lot of stock in the scale, this can really mess with your sense of consistency and certainty in whatever goal you're trying to achieve with your body at that time. Let alone some of the weight swings that I've had in terms of contest preparation. I will no longer use a dehydration protocol in future bodybuilding shows, but when I've done it in the past, it's been very common for me to lose upwards of about 20 pounds of water and a lot of glycogen in that last week. The Monday compared to the Saturday morning of the show when you actually weigh in. So the body has an incredible ability to either store or eliminate water based on a number of variables. What kind of swings do you normally see?
That's a good question. Yeah, when I was eating a more mixed diet, up to 1,000 grams of carbs per day, that was putting me plus or minus around about 2.5 kilos. So my weight could shift anywhere from 112.5 to 117.5. The higher amount would of course be on days where I was perhaps binge eating too much Haribo, lots of sugar, lots of salt, pizza, things like that. The lower days would be days where I've had enough of eating Haribo and I've eaten less. So it does seem to be reflective by the amount of food that you eat, and of course, the bigger you are, the more mass that you have, the more your weight can actually shift in one direction or the other. So if you're on a very, what I call a large fat loss journey, you're going from say 400 pounds down to 300 pounds, you're going to be looking at it from a long haul approach, like really zooming out of your weight metrics over a period of time. Day to day, it's going to swing so much, it'll be so difficult to track. So in that sort of circumstance, I'd say you're eating less than what you were before, so you will lose fat. Brilliant. How are you going to measure that? Don't go on the scales every day. It'll vary too much. You might get disheartened. So I might suggest that person to do it every week or 2 weeks. I think a 2-week period is a fair sort of judgment. Now, if they're a bit more calculating, a bit more conscious and aware of the things that we're mentioning, then perhaps they might just do it daily. You might perform an average out of the daily amount that they've had and say, okay, well, my average has gone down over the 2-week period, 2 kilos, 4 pounds or so. So that's going to be a good measurement as well if you can do it that way and not be disheartened. The other ones I'm thinking of as well, right? So things like bowel movements. I mean, I've actually weighed mine before. Not on the scale, not the bowel movement itself, not the stool itself, but I've stood on the scale before and after for urination and for number twos. Number ones, anywhere from maybe 200 to about 800 grams. So half a pound to maybe 2 pounds nearly.
2 pounds, yeah.
Yeah, and that's just to go for a wee. Go for number two, perhaps. I've got to be careful what I say here, it might be wrong. I want to say about a pound, maybe 2 pounds if I've got a very sore stomach and I've been very ill.
Yeah.
So that can impact it as well. Thing as well, guys like us, we're in a carnivore diet. Some of us, if we're not eating a lot of food, we're not going very, very regularly to the toilet. It might be every 2 days in some cases. So you've got to bear that in mind as well. If you're weighing yourself on certain days, is it a number 2 day or not? That's going to impact it. So, you've got a lot to think about here, guys. How big are your poos?
I would probably around the same amounts. I haven't actually measured that in a few years. But you do remind me that, at least in myself, sometimes if I'm used to maybe having a little bit less fat on carnivore and I significantly increase the fat, or even the other way around, a little bit lower protein, higher fat, and then switch that, sometimes I'll have a bowel movement that is very loose. And if the bowel movement's very loose, there's a good chance that you're dumping a lot of water, but you could also be losing a lot of electrolytes. And as you very intelligently put it right before we went live, so many of these factors are interconnected. And there are very few localized systems in the body that only have a localized effect that doesn't downstream affect something else in the body. That's about the size of mine, but just shifting your macronutrient composition to touch on the first point we have can have a very acute difference on your scale weight.
Yeah, well said. Well, there's so much interconnection here. I mean, I'm looking at my list of little pinpoints as, the climate and the temperature that you're in. Like the other day, it was 21 degrees here, which is quite hot for the UK, believe it or not. Quite warm. I'm not adjusted to that climate. So my body might sweat more. It's not my native habitat in terms of what I've been doing for the last 6 months of the year. So that would mean I'll sweat more, probably drink more. My weight might be lower. At the same time, it could also be higher if I'm drinking beyond my natural first limit and level. So that comes into it as well, and that will obviously affect things as well, like sleep quality. If you're drinking loads of water, you'll probably need to go to the toilet more. You won't sleep as well. So what do you know about sleep? I'd actually estimate that we actually lost the most amount of fat from our body when we're actually asleep. What do you think about that? Is that twisting some cogs?
I would have to think about that some more to kind of look at sleep from a different angle. I've noticed in myself that on nights when sleep is just terrible, I wake up feeling puffy and feeling inflamed and just feeling like I can almost feel like there's just like a lot of water stashed in my face. And maybe I should actually take some pictures and see if I can compare on a day when I have a good night's sleep versus a day that I have a bad night's sleep. But I feel almost like a water balloon if I get a bad night's sleep right when I get up in the morning. And it takes a few hours to kind of get back to what feels like normal to me. I would really have to think about losing fat when we sleep. And we breathe out fat, right? Like when fat is metabolized, the end byproducts are essentially carbon dioxide and water. So we breathe it out and we eliminate it through our urine. I would have to think on that some more, but that's a really interesting thought.
The argument is that there's hormonal elements that come into play, which mean that the fat oxidizes at a higher rate, and therefore the carbon dioxide is higher in terms of the output. I mean, thinking about it, just to go to this point very briefly, we know it's better to get an hour's extra sleep than deprive yourself of an hour's sleep to do an hour's cardio. We have essential things that our body needs to do. We have detoxification processes which are taking place in our liver to allow us to do different things in our body, to allow us to excrete and metabolize different compounds in our body, and fat and energy and all sorts of things. So sleep is a critical one here. Also kind of touched as well on the respiration rate. You know, you're going to be respiring more when you're exercising. You're going to be sweating more, so your scale weight will also change greatly. If you're, for example, doing a sprint in a sauna, that's going to be like the quickest way to lose weight, I think. But at the same time, it's not sustainable. It's not all going to be fat, and you're going to feel like trash. So it's not a good idea. So these wetsuits, guys, these sauna suits, don't invest into them. They're not going to be, for the purposes that we're talking about here, they're not going to be useful.
Yeah.
Trying to think of the other ones as well. It's probably only relevant really to the female audience. My 17% female audience I currently have, which is amazing actually. I'm surprised I have any females that watch this video, apart from Sophie. So the time of month and menstruation that comes into it. I know a lot of female carnivores I speak to, they find that they need or have a high appetite before their period of each month. You know, they might have higher intake of iron around that period of time as well, because they're about to lose a load of iron through blood. So that could come into it as well. I mean, I've never actually met a woman personally that has ever said my weight or inflammation or puffiness is about the same regardless of time of month.
Yep.
It seems to be, it's always, if they're having periods still, they're always the same kind of differential.
Yep. I have a former partner that either a few days before or a few days after, there'd be such a swing in scale weight, but also how she felt. Some days she would feel like she's just retaining so much water. And then other days she would feel super lean and like athletic and just feeling great. So with all of these factors that can influence scale weights, I mean, you and I are still both fans of the scale as one tool to use to try and provide some objective data in somebody's body composition journey. So how much importance do you put on the scale? Where do you rank it compared to other factors? And you kind of touched on it, but how often do you think somebody should be using the scale, and how much trust should they put in those numbers?
That's a very good question. I think you cannot put full trust into these things when it comes to the scale. In terms of getting a measurement that you can get very quickly in a period of time regularly, every day you can step on the scale, every morning. It does give an indication of whether you're losing or gaining weight. Now, whether that weight is fat, muscle, what you're doing there, who knows? It's one tool. Another one you can look at, of course, is the clothes, how tightly they fit. This t-shirt here is a 4XL, believe it or not. It's a 4XL. And sometimes it feels tight, sometimes it feels loose. If I go to the gym, it'll feel skin tight. If I get a pump, it'll feel skin tight. So what you're doing, how much movement you've got in a day will impact that as well. You know, you do get subtle extra blood flow in certain areas. If you're, for example, if you're wearing a tight pair of jeans and you go for a little walk, at the end of the walk they'll feel very tight. So it's not the best indicator. The clothes, how they fit, is not the best indicator, but it is a good indicator if you're looking at it from a period of a trend over time. If, for example, I wanted to lose 10 pounds of fat, I might aim to keep the shoulder region of my t-shirt quite snug, but decrease my waist size so it feels more loose around the waist. That's how I know I was losing fat, not muscle, for example. There's, of course, other things we can look at. In terms of my body building career, my preparations, I've liked digital and manual calipers a lot. Just because I know how to use them, I can use them regularly, frequently. They're reliable, as in I know how to, I can accurately measure myself for a lot of body parts. That gives me an indication of whether I'm losing fat or not. There's an element of skill to this and expertise and practice, so it's not everyone can do this. Of course, we've got the other things as well, the expensive things like the DEXA scans and bod pods and all sort of things. These are hard to come by for a lot of people, quite expensive as well, but they're probably the most accurate way you can really underpin what's happened to your body. Ideally, we'd all be in labs testing ourselves out with perfect diets, but we can't all do that. I mean, what do you like to use, Jerome, for your clients and yourself? What do you think is, but like maybe short term and long term in terms of like the trend? What would you be using?
Yeah, so and it depends on how much body fat somebody has. When somebody is quite lean, single digits for men, maybe right around 15 to 20% for women. You can see changes every couple of days if you're kind of in a fat loss mode. So if someone's relatively lean, I usually go by kind of just what they see in the mirror. Clothes fitting is a great arbiter, but at the same time, like if you wear a shirt a couple of times, it can stretch out a little bit. It can become a little bit more loose, and it might give you kind of a false sense of where you're at the time. The way I look at it is scale weight, numbers in the gym, what you see when you look in the mirror, how your clothes fit. These are all different tools. They're all puzzle pieces to try and give you one small nugget of information out of a bigger picture. And yes, scale weight does matter in a sense, but it's not as important. It's not the primary metric that I think most people should be using. So I generally, with clients, recommend weighing themselves no more than once a week, usually closer to once every other week, kind of like what you said earlier. I think is a good number for most people. But for the most part, it's what you see in the mirror, and get a hand mirror, because it's easy for a lot of people to stand facing the mirror and kind of stand in such a way and flex just right to where even if they have a significant amount of body fat that they need to lose, you can still look relatively good. And you can wear a shirt sometimes that makes you look good in a certain way. But for a lot of people, if you get a hand mirror and turn around and actually see how you look from the back and from the side, you'll get a much better picture of kind of your fat distribution and any changes that may happen in your physique. So it's one out of many tools. And I like having a DEXA scan done occasionally. I'm fortunate that there's a number of colleges around here with exercise physiology labs to where you can either pay $100. Otherwise, if it's in the middle of like a school semester, you can often try and contact them and see if they want to use you like a lab rat to make sure the students know how to work the equipment. Sometimes you can sneak in there for free. But even DEXA scans, you can manipulate based on hydration and a number of other factors. So it's just one tool out of many in your toolbox to try and determine what's happening in your body. And you shouldn't put too much stock in any single metric.
That's very well said. I have nothing to add to that. I hope this video has been informative for everyone. If you've got any questions on this, we might do a follow-up at some point, because of course people have different experiences and we don't like to be too myopic with our viewpoints, and perhaps someone out there has a better measurement. Perhaps there's a better way to do it. Anyway, please also subscribe to Jerome. He has a YouTube channel which is just Jerome Armstrong. That's at 18 Minute Fitness, and he also has a very, very, very excellent coaching studio in Wisconsin.
Thank you.
Which I advise everyone to follow, and we'll look into at least if you can get around there.